And as the athletes prepare, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your officials for this event. Your Len referee, Ildiko Kellerman. Your Len assistant referee, Hanna Novotna. And the panel A judges, Judge 1, Anatoly Rezhnichenko. Judge 2, Peter Axtelius. Judge 3, Carmen Stritburg. Judge 4, Alexander Vinogradov. Judge 5, Anna Vianyuk. Judge 6, Roland van der Voort. And Judge 7, Valerio Palazzo. And we have our first diver on the board, Tommaso Rinaldi, Italy. Inward, 2.5 somersaults, height. Seven and a half, 8, 8 and a half, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 8. Michele Benedetti, Italy, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 7, 7 and a half, 7, 8. Mathieu Rosset, France, back 2.5 somersaults, 1.5 twist, height. Eight, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 7, 8, 8, 8. Fabian Brandl, Austria, inward, 2.5 somersaults, height. Six and a half, 6 and a half, 6 and a half, 6, 6 and a half, 6 and a half, 6 and a half. Jesper Tolvers, Sweden, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 6.5, 6, 7. Ramon de Meyer, Netherlands. Inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 6.5, 8, 7.5, 7, 7, 7. Jorik de Bruin, Netherlands, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Six, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6. Sascha Klein, Germany, inward 3.5 somersaults, switch up. Eight, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 6.5, 7.5. Damien Savy, France, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Seven and a half, 7, 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 7. Artur Chislow, Poland, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Five and a half, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5. Andrei Pavluk, Belarus, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Four, 5, 4, 5, 5, 4.5. Andrzej Jezutek, Poland, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Javier Guiana, Spain, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Six, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 6, 5.5. Konstantin Blaha, Austria. Forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist, height. Seven and a half, 7.5, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Evgeny Karolov, Belarus, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7. Stefanos Paparounas, Greece, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Eight, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7, 7, 7.5. Ilya Kvasha, Ukraine, inward 3.5 somersaults with top. Six, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 6. Alexei Prigorov, Ukraine, inward 3.5 somersaults with top. Eight, 7, 7.5, 7, 8, 8, 7.5. Andrea Aloisio, Switzerland, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Six, 5.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 6. Patrick Hausling, Germany. Back 2.5 somersaults, height. Eight and a half, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 8.5. Evgeny Kuznetsov, Russia, inward 3.5 somersaults with tug. Eight, 7.5, 7, 8, 8, 7.5, 7.5. Jack Law, Great Britain, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. Eight, 8, 8, 8.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5. Christopher Mears, Great Britain, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Eight, 8, 8, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 8. Espen Valheim, Norway, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7, 7. Otto Lehtonen, Finland, forward 2.5 somersaults, so 1 twist, height. Three and a half, 3.5, 4.5, 3.5, 4.5, 3.5, 3. Ilya Zakharov, Russia, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Four and a half, 4.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5. Tamas Kellerman, Hungary, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Five and a half, 4.5, 5, 5, 5.5, 6, 5. That brings us to the end of the first round of nines. The current standings are on the scoreboard for you now. Still a long way to go in this competition, but please remember it is the top 12 who qualify for this afternoon's final. There are some names below that 12 who will definitely want to be in that final this evening. And so we move into the second round. Tommaso Rinaldi, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Eight and a half, 8, 8, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 8. Michele Benedetti, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Four and a half, 4.5, 5, 4, 5, 4.5, 4.5. Matteo Rossi, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Seven and a half, 6.5, 7, 6.5, 7.5, 7, 7. Fabian Brandl, forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist, height. Five, 5.5, 5, 6, 6, 5.5. Jesper Tolfus, Sweden, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Six and a half, 6.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Ramon de Maya, forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist, height. 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7, 7, 7.5. Yorick de Bruyne, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Eight and a half, 8, 7.5, 8, 8. Sasha Klein, forward 4.5 somersaults with top. Four and a half, 4, 5.5, 4, 4.5, 3.5, 4. Damien Saley, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Six and a half, 6, 6, 6, 6, 7, 4. Artur Chislow, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Five, 6, 6, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 7. Andrei Pavluk, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Five and a half, 6, 6, 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5. Andrei Jejutek, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Seven and a half, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. Javier Yana, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Eight, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 8. Konstantin Blaha, inward 2.5 somersaults, height. 8, 7, 7 and a half, 8 and a half, 8, 7 and a half, 7 and a half. Eugenie Carolyn, forward 3 and a half somersaults, pint. Six and a half, 6, 6, 7, 6 and a half, 6, 6 and a half. Stefanos Pavrounas, forward 3 and a half somersaults, pint. Seven and a half, 7, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 8, 8, 7 and a half. Ilya Kavasha, forward 4 and a half somersaults with tuck. Seven and a half, 6, 7 and a half, 6 and a half, 7 and a half, 6 and a half, 6 and a half. Alexei Prigorov, forward 4 and a half somersaults with tuck. Six and a half, 5 and a half, 6, 5 and a half, 6 and a half, 6, 6 and a half. Andrea Aloisio, forward 3 and a half somersaults, pint. Six and a half, 6, 6 and a half, 6 and a half, 6, 6, 6. Patrick Housing, forward 3 and a half somersaults, pint. Eight, 8, 8 and a half, 7 and a half, 8 and a half, 7 and a half, 8. Evgeny Kuznetsov, back 3 and a half somersaults with tuck. Eight and a half, 8, 9, 8 and a half, 8, 8, 8 and a half. Jack Law. Reverse 2.5 somersaults, 1.5 twists, right. Five and a half, 6.5, 7.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 6.5. Christopher Mears, reverse, 2.5 somersaults, right. Seven, 7.5, 7. Espen Valheim, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 6, 6, 6.5, 6, 6, 5. Otto Lehtonen, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Three, 3.5, 3, 4, 2.5, 2.5. Ilya Zakharov, back 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Eight, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7. Thomas Kellerman, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Two and a half, 3.5, 2.5, 2. 2.5, 3, 3.5. That brings us to the end of the second round of dives. The current standings are once again on the scoreboard for you now. Please could I remind spectators not to use flash photography during the performance of the dives. Please could you ensure the flash function on your cameras and mobile phones is turned off. Thank you. And to the third round of dives. Tommaso Rinaldi, back 2.5 somersaults, height. 8, 8, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5. Michele Benedetti, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Six and a half, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7. Mathieu Rosset, forward 4.5 somersaults with tuck. Eight and a half, 8.5, 8.5, 9, 8.5, 8.5, 9. Fabien Brandon, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Five and a half, 6, 6, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 6. Jesper Tolbers, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Six and a half, 6, 6.5, 6, 7, 6, 6. Ramon de Meyer, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Seven, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7, 7, 7. You're in the groove. Reverse 1.5 somersaults, 3.5 twists, free position. Seven and a half, 8, 8, 8, 7.5, 8. Sasha Klein, back 2.5 somersaults, 1.5 twists, height. 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. Damian Sebi, forward 3.5 somersaults, height. Seven and a half, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5. After Chislow, reverse 2.5 somersaults, height. Two and a half, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2.5. Andrei Pavluk, reverse 2.5 somersaults, height. Five and a half, 4.5, 5, 6, 6, 6. Andrei Jejutek, inward 3.5 somersaults with tuck. Seven, 6.5, 5.5, 7, 7, 7, 7. Javier Iana, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists, height. Six and a half, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 8, 8, 8. Konstantin Blaha, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists, height. Five and a half, 7, 7.5, 6.5, 6, 7, 7. Evgeny Karolov, back 2.5 somersaults, height. Six and a half, 7, 7.5, 7, 6.5, 5.5, 5.5. Stefanos Paparounas, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists, height. 7 and a half, 7, 7, 7 and a half, 7, 6 and a half, 7. Ilian Kavasha. Reverse 2 and a half somersaults, 1 and a half twists, height. Seven and a half, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 8, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 7 and a half. Alexei Prigorov, back 2 and a half somersaults, height. Six, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6 and a half, 6 and a half. Andrea Aloisio, back 2 and a half somersaults, height. Four, 4, 5 and a half, 4 and a half, 4 and a half, 4, 4. Patrick Housing. Forward 2 and a half somersaults, 3 twists, height. Five and a half, 5 and a half, 6 and a half, 6, 5 and a half, 5 and a half, 6 and a half. Evgeny Kuznetsov, reverse 3 and a half somersaults with tuck. Eight and a half, 8, 8 and a half, 8 and a half, 7 and a half, 7 and a half, 8. Jack Law, back 2 and a half somersaults, height. Two and a half, 1 and a half, 1 and a half, 1 and a half, 2, 2 and a half, 1 and a half. Panel B judges, please prepare to take your seats. Christopher Mears. Reverse 2 and a half somersaults, 1 and a half twists, height. Six and a half, 7 and a half, 6 and a half, 6, 6, 6 and a half, 7. Espen